Okay, I'm going to take a minute to react to this particular narrative about Trump claiming the polls are rigged against him, and um, the supposed debunking of the claim. Because I think that the situation is actually the other way around. First of all, let's try to make sense of what he's saying, because I don't. I've seen a bunch of things that talk about it, and I haven't really seen anything that quite gets it right yet, from what I can see. So what Trump is doing here is he's conflating two related points. He's looking at the WikiLeaks release, which is about oversampling, which is a technical thing. We don't really actually even need to know what that means to understand what Trump said. Okay, and the confusion that Trump is sowing. But he's taking that WikiLeaks release and he's using it to try to explain the fact that a lot of the mainstream polling is actually overweighting Democrats. And so the confusion here is the terms oversampling and overweighting. And what he's doing is he's blaming it on collusion between Clinton and the media. Okay? So this WikiLeaks stuff comes out, and I think it's John Podesta talks about oversampling Democrats, and what Trump is doing is he's taking that and saying, aha, by Podesta talking about oversampling Democrats, therefore that is evidence that the overweighting that the Democrats are seeing in by the mainstream polling firms is being orchestrated by Clinton's campaign team. This is actually far too sophisticated to be just stupidity. This is very clearly smoke. If you actually understand what's happening here, what it is that Trump is saying, and the way that it's being thrown out there, this is smoke and mirrors. This is something that is confusing and is probably going to confuse most people. Now, we don't have to know. I mean, we can probably all agree that Trump is not particularly savvy about polling himself. But we can also see that Trump has surrounded himself with polling people. And so it's very easy to look at the situation and say, the guy's an idiot. He doesn't understand what he's saying. He's not understanding what it is that he's seeing. I think it's actually fairly clear that that's not what's actually at play here. Okay, my batteries are going on me again. Okay, so these batteries need to just get chucked, as we can see. Let's hope I can finish my point. No, I'm not going to finish my point. Let's stop here. I'll be back in a second. Okay, that's very restricting to me. It means I only have two pairs. I'll have to deal with that some way or other. Yeah, it's easy to look at the situation and be like, he's an idiot. He doesn't understand what he's saying. He couldn't fuck this up the way that he's fucked it up. This is too sophisticated for that. At the very least, he's being encouraged by somebody that actually does understand what these words mean, like perhaps Kellyanne Conway or perhaps Steve Bannon. So let's drop the immediate assumption that he doesn't understand what he's saying. He might not understand what he's saying, but the people that are telling him what to say understand what he's saying. The reason this is very sneaky is because it plays into the typical liberal media conspiracy theory. It's been being pushed forever. So they're taking this unrelated snippet, really, and they're using it to build up something that they know exists. Right? This is as powerful, or maybe even more powerful, than any dog whistle type politics. As soon as you bring up the whole liberal media conspiracy and you come up with any ridiculous amount of, any silly evidence in favor for it, you get this, this army of really just total dipshits. right? You get this army of dipshits going on about the liberal media conspiracy, everything's biased and everything else, right? And a lot of these people may have been um, open to persuasion otherwise, but you get that kind of thing. It's a control tactic, and it's one of the right's best control tactics is the liberal media, because it eliminates rational discourse. As soon as you start blaming everything on the liberal media, it you know it's like saying Satan's in control of things. Well, so how do you have a reasonable discussion when your opponent is Satan, right? And I'm not exaggerating much in terms of the actual discourse. Have you had a conversation with these kinds of people when they get into this? You can't debate with them. There's no logic there. Anything you say just upholds the conspiracy. And this is not like this is you're getting outside of 9-1. You're outside of the truthers and you're outside of the birthers when you start talking about the liberal media conspiracy. Otherwise, halfways articulate conservatives will melt into, uh, they'll melt into irrational nonsense when on activation with the liberal media conspiracy. And so this was actually very smart, the way that he did this. Okay? So let's try to understand what's actually happening. Okay, it is true that a lot of the mainstream polls overweight Democrats. And it's also true that they overweight women. The reason is that there are more Democrats than Republicans and more women than men. So when you see these polls that are actually based on census data, and they have Trump in the 30s, well, they're looking at the census data, and they're looking at reliable data about, registered Democrats. They're looking at census data about gender breakdowns. And their census data tells them that, okay, we should expect that, Trump to run somewhere in the 30s. And then, the Trump people look at that and they say, wait a second, you didn't weight them equal. You gave an unfair advantage to the Democrats, and you gave an unfair advantage to women. That advantage is based on what the facts are. It's not an unfair advantage. In fact, if they were to weight them equally, then that would be fucking with the numbers. Weighting them equally would be giving Trump an unfair advantage. And in fact, I think that that's something that's actually happening. Okay? And this is why you're seeing some polls that are very close and other polls where there's a big difference. And in fact, that's something that has been reported on. There was a gravis breitbart poll. In fact, it's a daily tracking poll or something close to that. And it was commissioned to... You've got to be careful with the language that you use, right? Because the language they want to use is to have an equal weighting. In fact, the Breitbart poll has an unequal weighting because they're overweighting Republicans relative to the population. And if you do what Breitbart's doing, then yeah, you're going to expect closer results because you're cooking the numbers. It's Breitbart that's cooking the numbers. And they're cooking the numbers by balancing them out before they crunch them. It's like walking into a forest, and complaining that trees have more effect on the sunlight than ferns. And what these Republican polling firms are doing is really almost exactly the same kind of thing that they criticize, like Safe Space or millennials for, right? Trying to control the reality around them so that everything is perfectly equal, everything is perfectly fair. So Republicans and Democrats are perfectly fairly weighted, even though reality is that there's way more Democrats. I know. It's remarkable, isn't it? White people can't deal with that. There are millions of more registered Democrats than there are registered Republicans. And that difference is increasing. So when you look at what the reliable scientific polling firms are doing, yeah, they are overweighting the Democrats because that's what exists in reality. But this is the conspiracy theory, okay? To Donald, to much of the right, this is a conspiracy theory, and they're trying to tap into it. This is not, this is not dummy Donald running off at the mouth. This is very carefully constructed propaganda. This is very sophisticated. As a control tactic, as a mind-altering, as a tool of political control. This is sophisticated, and don't think it isn't, okay? But the reality is the cliche that, reality has a liberal bias. I'm actually convinced that the media is being too generous to Donald in relying on Obama-era trends to overweight whites as Republican-leaning. That it hasn't caught up to a regression backwards and is projecting in the opposite direction of where the polls are leading. The polls are showing that white people are abandoning Trump. And yet these mainstream media polls, the only reason that they're close is that they're overweighting whites. They're underweighting blacks. And there's no justification for this. All of the census figures suggest that we're going to continue to see a decline in white voter turnout. Out of nowhere, and for no reason at all, the networks are reversing a decade-long trend that no census data supports at all. It's complete fantasy. The demographics that they're using. Pulled totally out of nowhere. And when you actually apply census data, you get the you get the polling that has a big difference between the two of them. So what we are seeing, we are not seeing an unfair exaggeration of Democrat support, but we are seeing a very much unjustified overestimation of white Republican support that is exaggerating Trump's support. The media is pro-Trump, guys. And the polls are being skewed in his favor by overweighting white Republican voters and underweighting white Democrats. How bad is it? Well, I can guess, you can guess. But we'll have to wait until the election to find out.